Good afternoon, everybody. This is Alex Ditton. I'm with Underground Noise. This is Webisode number 23. Please hit that subscribe button, like it, share it. I would appreciate it. I'm here today with Nyk Edinger from the band Possession, Frost Like Ashes, and Ninth Sphere. Welcome, Nyk. How you doing?
Great. It's awesome to be here.
Very awesome. First off, I would like to ask you, Nyk, who are your musical influences?
Well, since I was a child, I suppose, of the 80s and early 90s, early influences probably were like Dale Thompson from Matrix and Bride. And then moving on from that, bands like Merciful Fate or King Diamond, and then even into bands like Samael and Cradle of Filth, of course. So those are probably the ones that come to me off the top of my head.
That's cool. What was the music like when you were growing up as a kid? Like, were some of your friends?
Well, as a kid, probably not until about 7th grade. I changed schools and then got introduced into some heavier bands, and I suppose they'd be considered hard rock bands. But we just kind of progressed along, starting from maybe like Armored Saint or Icon or Dokken or Iron Maiden, those sorts of bands. Then moving up into, Metallica and Slayer and Anthrax and Testament, the thrash metal bands. And it seemed to me at that point, then my musical tastes kind of took a turn to the more extreme bands, whereas most of my friends stayed pretty much, right where they were. So
That's awesome. My brother had a question that he wanted to ask you, even though he's not present. The question is, did you intentionally set out to make the absolute scariest metal album of all time, or did it just happen that way?
I think like with probably most bands, they have an idea of what they want to do, and maybe what they want to accomplish, but it's not laid out in goals necessarily like that, at least not right away. You're really just doing the very best that you can, and you're if you're really, especially metal artists, if you're really doing it the way it should be done, it's coming from your heart and it's coming from inside you. So I just always felt like designing music and designing songs and lyrics, etc., to fit the idea or the concept that I'm trying to portray. And so since I'm not sure which album he's referring to, but most of my songs are really focused on supernatural. They're focused on the spiritual realm, and those things, even if you're not dealing with the more frightening parts of it, just the power of that realm and just our insignificance in being able to deal with it is quite frightening in and of itself. So I think that's, if I'm doing the music properly, then it's reflected that way.
I think you might be referring to Eternally Haunt.
Yeah, that was probably my guess.
Yeah,
The beginning of that album still makes the hair stand up on my arms. So
and me both, especially the hair on the back of my neck as well.
yeah,
It's definitely a booster, that's for sure.
yeah, I think it sets up the album well, and especially the first song. You don't know what to expect, and it just keeps getting more and more intense, and we felt it was a good introduction to the band and the way we wanted to be portrayed. So
Very cool. I wanted to ask you, this is like a two-part question. Who came up with the name Possession and why was that name chosen?
I came up with the name Possession, and I had the band I was in previously had the guitar player left, and he was pretty much the creative force behind that band. So once that happened, took kind of a little bit of a hiatus, and I had been wanting to maybe push the envelope a little bit and get a little heavier, get a little faster, that sort of thing. We had just had a guitar player join, and so I don't know how long it was, but it was several months, if not a year or more, that that we kind of just were in hiatus. And then I called up my former drummer and then that guitar player as well, and asked them if they wanted to form this band. And I named it Possession because I felt like it's a name that has multiple meanings, and since I'm wanting to deal with a lot of the spiritual realm sort of things, it just fits right into that idea. And being someone's possession or something's possession, as well as being possessed, that is really the idea behind that name. And just all the different ideas and conversations that one can have kind of created by that name and by the idea that it brings to your mind. So
I also wanted to ask you, how do you go about your vocal approach from growling to falsetto, or is that actual clean singing?
is it actually what?
Clean singing, like regular singing vocals?
Oh, okay. I actually didn't do very much clean singing. I think the closest you could say that I did any what I would call clean singing would be in the cover of Iron Maiden's Revelations, and then also maybe a little bit I did Dangerous Meeting by Merciful Fate, and I did Shrine by King Diamond. So those would have a little more of what I would consider singing in them. But as far as the original music I've written, and I don't know if I can even think of a time when I would did what I consider really clean singing. The difference between the growling and then the high falsetto screaming is there's more notes involved in the high falsetto screaming than there would be where in the lower vocals. It's not as harsh on the voice, and it's really very, very controllable. It's more controllable for me anyway. When I was really getting honed in on the falsetto vocals, I could pretty much do anything I wanted, and it's much more concentrated in your breathing, so you're letting out just a little bit of air at a time, and you're really flexing your lungs and keeping them really solid, rather than the lower vocals where you're letting out quite a bit of breath. So it's a completely different technique, and I always liked high vocals from the very beginning of listening to music. No matter what I was listening to, I always gravitated towards the higher vocal, and so that's what I really wanted to do. And honestly, developed my vocal style before I ever heard King Diamond, for instance, who would be somebody that you would probably compare the falsetto side of things to. And so I hadn't really heard anybody doing what I was doing. And so I just was kind of making it up as I went along and doing it the best that I could. When I finally heard King Diamond in, I think, probably 1989 or so, I popped in the tape and was like, man, this is exactly what I've been trying to do all of these years, you know? So once I heard that, then that did help help me be able to balance the high vocals I was doing along with the death metal vocals that I was doing. So
That's very cool. Which song off of Eternally Haunt did you find to be the most difficult to write and perform? And also, which one would you consider to be your favorite?
Steel Jaws of Fate was nearly impossible to sing. And was there a perfect execution of that song ever? I don't know. It was far too fast. It was beyond what really I could do. And, you know, and that's probably one thing that I regret, or maybe wish I could go back and change, is that I felt like if I wasn't pushing myself to the absolute limit all the time, then I wasn't giving everything I could to the song, you know. And now I understand that that's not the case. Being controlled and being precise and all of those things are equally as important as just energy, you know. So Steel Jaws of Fate is the classic example of how I was viewing writing things at the time. I just I wanted to push myself as hard as I possibly could. I remember recording that song, and I would, you know, mess up or something and need to go back and cut in, and I couldn't even explain to the engineer where I wanted to cut in, because even with the lyrics in front of him, he couldn't figure out where in the heck I was. So I probably wouldn't do that song again. that one's too difficult. My favorite song of that album, probably would be Beyond the Grave. That one just really had a great feel to it, beginning to end, and it was a furious song. It never stopped, and it was great to perform, and we usually used it as an opener. So I like that song.
What's your local music scene like?
Surprisingly great. We have a number of death metal, black metal bands. I have a new band. They're calling themselves Black and Roll. So it's kind of black metal-ish Motorhead sort of thing going on with those guys. All the bands, they don't all play music that I particularly listen to on a daily basis, but they're all really good at it. And obviously I live in a very small town, so having bands at all is a surprise. But the bigger surprise to me is that if I listed every band that we had here, none of them are terrible. They're all good at what they do, and they all have a kind of different style, all recognizable. So, and they put on great shows, so we might have, we could easily have 100 people at a show. So that's not too bad.
That sounds really awesome. Now, if I'm not mistaken, you're over in Kansas, right?
No, I am in Bismarck, North Dakota.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So we were based out of Kansas City. We all lived there during the time that the band was around. As far as Possession, Frost Like Ashes, about halfway through, we started moving out to different parts of the country. So I moved to North Dakota in 2004, and as far as Frost Like Ashes, we've been doing everything remote since then. Ninth Sphere as well is remote. So yeah, that's where I'm at now.
That's very cool. I'm here in Macon, Georgia, because back in 2006, I had moved to Kansas. I was in Shawnee Mission, actually.
Yep.
Then I moved back to New York in 2008.
So did you just come to Kansas City in 06, you said?
Yeah, I was there for
Okay.
a short period of time.
Yeah, I left in 2004. I got there in 1987. So I was there for the end of thrash metal and the agonizing years of grunge. So yeah.
I take it you're not too big on grunge music?
No, can't say that I am. No.
That's all right. I like a little bit of it myself, actually. Stuff like Soundgarden, Alice in Chains.
Yeah. As I'm getting older, I'm able to appreciate more things than I did when I was younger. But I really viewed music as a battlefield, kind of as a war. And if you were not on my team, then you were the enemy. It was a very militaristic attitude I had as far as music. So grunge was definitely not, it was offensive in my mind, to what we were trying to do. So
how do you manage to keep up with 3 bands?
Well, Possession ended in 98, and so that really has been done since 98. It pretty much laid dormant until a record label from Spain contacted me, and they had been fans of Possession since Eternal Haunt came out, and we started talking about the possibility of re-releasing everything that Possession did, in addition to a few things that we never did release. So that's really how Possession kind of came back to the forefront. It took many years to get everything together. I had everything remastered. I had things on ADAT tapes that I had to get taken off ADATs, and of course nobody had any ADATs anymore. So that was a struggle, and so got everything together, and then that album came out last year, and has been selling really, really well. So after that was Frost Like Ashes. Frost Like Ashes, we probably were dormant from about 2006 or 7 or so. We played a show, I believe, in 2006. We played a festival, and I think that was the last we played. And if I'm not mistaken, so it wasn't really until maybe 2 years ago that we started kind of ramping things up again. And once again, it was started by a label. Contacted Sabat and said they would really like us to write some more material and get some more material out. So kind of touched base with everybody, and we did end up getting a different drummer to do it. But it really went way better than I would have expected. And I think it went well enough and gave us all enough creative ideas that we're going to continue working on things. So in the absence of Frost Like Ashes, I had just been doing little projects here and there, and started talking with Derek from Sympathy up in Calgary, Alberta. And we decided to form a band named Ninth Sphere. And it had been music that he had already written and just wasn't liking the way the vocals were going. And so I kind of hopped in there, and we finished that album at the end of last year, and we're just waiting on a few things for that to get released, and have another album on the way for that band as well. So it's busy doing that all, but it also gives me different outlets because each band has kind of a different feel, and I just really dislike getting bored with music, and that's kind of why my vocals are all over the place, because I get bored with them after 3 or 4 lines, and it needs to change. So actually having different bands where I can experiment and grow is actually pretty cool and pretty refreshing. And it's just it's crazy to think something that started in high school is still going strong all these years later.
I've been a fan of Possession for years, but the bands Frost Like Ashes and Ninth Sphere, I'm not familiar with those two. What genre of music are they?
Frost Like Ashes is, you could put it into black metal. You could also put it into, we probably refer to ourselves a little bit more as blackened death metal, because there's a lot of death metal influences, and the song structures are probably a little more death metal than they are black metal. And I kind of feel like it was a natural progression of where my vocals were going, because if you listen to later Possession stuff, and then some of the songs that we had written before we actually broke up that were pretty much completed but never saw the light of day, my vocals were becoming more and more influenced by black metal bands, and like, Cradle of Filth and Samael and Satyricon, bands like that. So it was having those vocals with more death thrash metal music. It made a little bit more sense to go in a black metal direction and be a little more theatrical on the stage and that sort of thing. So I met Sabat at just the right time, and that's the route we took with Frost Like Ashes. Ninth Sphere also will fit into the black metal genre, but it is much more like Satyricon or Absu, that sort of thing. So it's not your Doom Borgir, Old Man's Child, Cradle of Filth, sort of Immortal. Not really that type of black metal. So it has a lot more diversity to it, I think. And with Ninth Sphere, nobody's heard Ninth Sphere yet because nothing has been released yet on it. So don't feel bad about that.
Not a worry, but that sounds great. I'm looking forward to hearing some of it. Now, in the beginning of the album, Eternally Haunt by Possession, you guys had a clip that says, and to pray for the sick, and to pray for the sick, and to pray for the demonized. Where did that clip come from, if you don't mind me asking?
Well, that is actually a live recording from a church service in Mission Viejo, California. It would have been back in probably 93, 94, somewhere in that ballpark that took place. And so the person talking, I believe, is probably the pastor. The screaming is the congregation. And so I had heard it on an AM talk show about 5 o'clock in the afternoon on a insufferably hot summer Kansas City day. And as soon as I heard it, like I said, the hair stood up on my arms, and I got cold chills despite it being like 98 degrees outside. And so as soon as I heard it, I was like, this is the perfect representation that of the fact that things outside of this world, outside of the realm that we, deal in on a daily basis, exists and is real. And so they replay that show at 10 o'clock. So I put in a cassette tape, hit record, and recorded the program, took it to the studio, had them cut it out of the tape. And we basically, that album was recorded on tape. And so we just basically spliced in the recording right off the AM recording that I made and stuck it on there. And it worked out perfectly.
Yeah, I remember the first time I bought the album from Rad Rockers. I was like, wow, Possession, this sounds like it would be a keeper. I listened to it and it basically scared the hell out of me. Literally. Yeah. Well, good. Yeah, it was funny because my brother ran in and he's like, what are you listening to, man? I'm like, Possession. He's like, are you sure that's Christian metal? I'm like, I think so, yeah. Because at first I didn't know. And I was like, this is incredible. So I showed it to a bunch of my friends in high school and they're like, dude, that's an intense record. I said, no, it's not from Intense Records, but it is pretty intense.
Yeah. Yeah. I don't think Intense Records would have allowed it.
No, probably not.
No, we ran in just the normal everyday metal circles, we only played one Christian show ever. And we pretty much got in trouble for playing what we played when we played that show. I don't know what they were expecting. But as soon as I got off stage, I got pulled into one of the club offices and I had to talk myself out of the office for about 2 hours. So that was up in Minneapolis. So they weren't convinced that we were a Christian band, I don't think. So, and I use the term Christian band, like I said, we ran in the normal metal circles. We just considered ourselves a metal band. I'm a Christian, so I wrote everything just like every writer does from their own perspective. And so that's what you got. So.
Yeah, it still stands to be one of my top 10 favorite metal albums of all time.
That's awesome. I appreciate that. It's nice to hear that it has stood the test of time, because when we were writing this and recording it and performing it, it just didn't fit anywhere. Were we a thrash band? Were we a death metal band? Were black metal was just making its rise? Were we a black metal band? Nobody knew, we didn't know. We were just putting together every sound that we enjoyed and putting it together the way we wanted it, and just tried to make it as absolutely intense as we possibly could. We wanted to paint a picture, orally. So it just didn't fit. We would perform, and people would just stand there staring blankly or with their mouths agape. They didn't know what to do with it. And granted, we were in Kansas City or in the Midwest, so it probably would have been different if we were maybe out on the coast or San Francisco or New York or something like that. Who knows? Or down in Florida. But knowing what we went through to write the album, to get it put out, and just the times we performed it, it's just really, really gratifying, I guess is the right word, to know that 30 years later, it's still good enough to be listened to and appreciated. So
Yeah, like I was telling you, that album right there is still in my top 10 favorites, amongst like Suffocation, Mortification, Deliverance, stuff like that. And
well, that's
Cannibal,
awesome.
of course.
Of course.
Yeah.
Well, to be listed in that list is just incredible for me, because I was listening to all those bands as well back in the day. So
Now, do you have any siblings or any children that are into metal music?
no, I have one brother. He is not into metal music. I have two sons. The older one is not really into metal. The younger one, he listens to a lot of different things. And so I don't know progressive metal, and symphonic power metal, that sort of stuff is definitely in his wheelhouse. So that's enjoyable to share those things with him, because I'm not really into progressive metal that much, although there's a few bands that I don't mind. Symphonic power metal, of course, is if you don't like that, I don't know if you really are metal. So
You listen to Dream Theater at all?
I would put them into a progressive metal category. The same thing with like Dark Tranquility, as they progressed, and Sentenced, and so I don't really listen to that so much. It's interesting because I like classical music, but for some reason there's just something about the progressive metal that I can't really get into. And it's not, I kind of view progressive metal, different than, let's say, grunge, right? So I don't get into grunge, don't enjoy that. But with progressive metal bands, the talent and the ability and the writing ability is just top notch. But for some reason, it just doesn't connect with me.
I can definitely understand that. Everybody's got their own taste, I suppose.
Yeah, and when you, I don't know. Sometimes I feel kind of alone in this idea, but I'm sure I'm not. But it's I have all these different things that I enjoy about metal music, and sometimes they seem like they're conflicting ideas. And then you take something like progressive metal and you're like, well, this has, 3 or 4 of the things you enjoy. Why don't you connect with it? And I honestly can't even say why. I could say that, well, it's not intense enough for me, or it's not brutal enough, or whatever. But then I enjoy bands like, Doro Pesh. It's not brutal, not super intense, So I can't explain it, but that's just it's just the way it is, I guess.
The only song that I ever listened to by Doro was with Udo, and that was
Oh, really?
Dancing with an Angel.
Yeah.
I
Yep.
said, this is kind of delicate, but I can listen to it.
Yeah. When she did, I felt like when she did Warlock, it was a little heavier, and that I enjoy more than her solo stuff. But
Yeah, Possession, like I said, Eternally Hot was one of the sickest albums I've ever heard. Because at that time I was listening to Mortification's album called Primitive Rhythm Machine, and when Possession released Eternally Hot, I was like, I don't know if I should listen to this right now or not. So I listened to it from start to finish, and it was the original release before you guys released the one with the covers on it. Because I know you guys did 2 releases, if I'm not mistaken.
yeah, so, and that was purely record label problems. So it so it ended up getting re-released on a different label. And I'm assuming that's where the covers got put on there. I'm not even really sure, honestly. So my Shane, the guitar player, was more involved in record label stuff and getting things released. So he probably would have a little better idea on those little details than I would.
That's cool. When you were growing up, Nyk, do you remember the very first instrument that you ever played?
Well, the first instrument would have been piano. I took piano lessons all during my childhood. I can't play piano, but I did at least learn how to read music and learn how to understand music. And then on my own, I played bass, but I only did that for a couple of years, I would say. Didn't learn very many songs, maybe a few Quiet Riot songs. And then I was playing sports a lot, so I didn't have a lot of time. I still listened to music constantly, but I didn't have a lot of time for playing music. And I grew up here in Bismarck, so there really wasn't anything, It's hard to describe what it was like growing up in the 80s, because there was no internet and you relied on magazines to even hear of bands, and you couldn't listen to them. You just had to stuff your cash in an envelope and send it in the mail and hope that you got something back. And then if you did get it, you hoped you liked it, right?
Absolutely.
So there really wasn't. It was, and then being in North Dakota was even worse, because we're out in the middle of nowhere, and if it's not country music, it's not anything. So it was pretty difficult for me to even consider, playing music or being in a band. I didn't even understand what that would be. So it wasn't until moving to Kansas City and just a series of events that led me to give doing vocals a try. And so I just showed up and started screaming into a microphone and trying to figure out what sounded good and what didn't sound good. So
How did you know that you always wanted to be a musician?
I did from probably 12 years old. In fact, after maybe it was after Eternally Haunt came out, let me think. It would have been no, it would have been the demo for my first band. When that came out, I had come back to North Dakota for my brother's graduation, and my literature teacher stopped me at the school and said, "Hey, I just wanted to remind you of what you wrote that you wanted to be when you grew up for your first literature assignment in 7th grade." And it was that I wanted to be a singer in a rock band. You know, I didn't know what heavy metal was at the time, but yeah. So she was happy to hear that I was at least beginning to start making that happen. So
That sounds like a lot of fun. Well, Nyk, I can't think of any other questions for you. Do you have any last words for Underground Noise?
well, I just want to thank you for having me on. It was a real pleasure. It was awesome getting to talk with you, and just really appreciate the thoughts about possession and in particular Eternally Haunt. Like I said, knowing what went into that album and what we went through, just personally and as a band as a whole, just trying to find our place in the metal world. Just the thought that I'm sitting here talking to somebody about it all these years later is just amazing. And so just want to thank you and thank all the people watching. And anybody can get in touch with me. I still have a few of the compilation double CD albums available for sale, and the label over in Spain has a lot for sale as well. So that has everything Possession ever put out, plus a few things that we didn't put out. So that would be pretty cool thing for somebody to have if you have enjoyed Possession. But you can contact me anytime and love to chat with you.
Sounds good, Nyk. You're welcome, and thank you for your time as well.
All right.